All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody, either in the chat now or tuning in later to video on demand. Welcome to Party Bear Mini's party stream. Here we are going to go ahead and paint some minis. We're going to chat about all things tabletop gaming. You're going to hear me go ahead and do a whole lot of rambling while I am trying to paint a group of orcs as quickly as I can. And by as quickly as I can, I mean within the allotted time I have for this broadcast. So, today we are going to continue what we did last week, and we're going to paint 5 more orcs from Steamforged Games, Epic Encounters, Hall of the Orc King. Now, if you tuned in last week, I have nothing but good things to say about this product. It is a box of 20 different orcs in a nice kind of frosty Viking theme. It MSRPs for $50. The miniatures are PVC, so that's kind of at the detail level you can expect. But there are multiple sculpts. They all look fantastic, and they are a joy to paint. So for our supplies today, we are going to have, first off, obviously the miniatures. Now, originally I was going to plan on trying to do 6, but I think I'm only going to stick to these 5. We have 3 orc archers. And we have 2, what they're saying are Orogs, which I personally like that they put these in. It's a nice little quirk to go ahead and fold into the orcs to go ahead and include their Orog kin. We have a whole bunch of different paints, and we should have all the paints we need to take care of these guys right now. We have my wet palette, which, for those not in the know, it is a piece of disposable gladware, a sponge, some water, and parchment paper. We have our brushes. We have a small fan that we're going to use to go ahead and help dry the washes whenever we need to. We have our surface, which is really, for me, mostly just to keep everything in camera shot. And then finally, we have the most important painting supply of all, some form of a drink. Today we are continuing on that bottle of a Glenlivet 12-year Scotch, because I may be a smelly chap, but I've got good tastes. So, we are going to go ahead and discuss some hot takes today, hopefully to engage viewers a little bit more, and they're not really going to be hot takes. You're going to wind up learning as you stick to this that I kind of have the attitude that you enjoy what you enjoy, and what you enjoy is not wrong. But I do have my opinions, and they are just as valid as anyone's. But most importantly, it is, well, you'll see what I mean once I get to them. So we are going to go and start with the painting. We're going to get right to it today, and we're not going to have to go over a ton of stuff when it comes to our supplies, because we went over that last week. But if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to ask. I am more than happy to answer. I will monitor the chat as best I can. Yes, it is in fact Scotch time. I do love my Scotch, and it helps me settle down by shaking hands. So, if you hear me slurping, that's what I'm slurping. All right, so for our first coat of paint, we're going to be following a very similar procedure to last week, which means we're going to start with the skin, inside to out. It's the most efficient way to do things. And we're going to go and start with the base coat for the skin, Snow Shadow by Reaper. And we're going to use primarily Reaper paints for this, because I primarily use Reaper paints with my stuff. I do have my pokey tool today to clear out the nozzles, also known as a well-used paperclip. And in the event that I get the time while I'm waiting for stuff to dry, we have our side project, which somebody may recognize as something that I'm painting up for them. So, first things first, we're going to go and put a fair bit of the Snow Shadow on the wet palette, and we're going to do a little bit more than I did last time, just because we are actually going to have quite a bit of ground to cover. It is a beaut. This one right here, I am not a fan of very many of the WizKids Dolzer's figures, but I do really like some of their larger figures. Their beholders are fantastic. This is a zombie beholder for those who are looking. Got a lot of work to do still on it, but we'll see if we can get a little bit of work done while we are painting orcs and waiting for stuff to dry. So, I just realized I don't have something. I do not have my water pot. I will be right back, and my apologies for being a dirtbag and not being completely prepared. All right, so for those of you who are interested in learning more about the painting process, I'm going to do something that I didn't do last week, and I should have because it's always good to follow best practices. The paint pot is on the opposite side of the table from the drink. Otherwise, it is extremely easy while you're not paying attention to clean off your brush in the scotch and drink the paint water. I would be lying if I said I've never drank the paint water. I have. It does not taste good, and it's not good for you. Don't drink the paint water. Be safe. Public service announcement from your friends at Party Bear Studios. All right, well, I'm not too worried about my paint drying out because it is on that wet palette. But we're going to go and start painting this skin. Now, this time around for the skin, I'm going to make sure to start on the Orogs. And I'm doing that specifically because they got a lot more skin showing by a pretty fair margin. The Orc Archers just have their faces and their hands, maybe a bit of knee depending on how I choose to interpret it, but these guys have a lot more showing. Now I'm doing them in the Snow Shadow because I want these to be more Ice Orcs, on account of the fact that I already have plenty of gray D&D Orcs and I have more green Warhammer Orcs than I can count. One day I will go and pull on some of my Warhammer stuff and be doing that on the stream, but I want to finish the Epic Encounters line first, or at least finish these orcs on account of the fact that I got them for Christmas from my darling lady love. And I think I owe it to her to go and get this done as quickly as possible. So we are not painting these up to a showcase standard, we're painting these up to a tabletop standard, which is why we should, if I can go ahead and actually paint and not just flap my gums the entire time, should be able to get all of them done just like we got all of them done last week. They're all going to be in pretty much the same scheme. These aren't a super simple scheme, but they are simple enough. We don't have a ton of bits and bobs, but we do still have a lot of variant textures. Now, sometimes I know for my commission side of painting, I have gotten people ask me because the prices can vary pretty wildly on how much I charge for stuff. And that's normally when I'll explain that I don't charge by the piece, I charge for the amount of time it's going to take me to do things. And if a miniature is largely one or two colors without a lot of bits and bobs on them, they're extremely easy to paint and they go by very quickly. So I don't have to charge nearly as much. However, there are some miniatures that are covered in those bits and bobs. West UCF, I will in fact be painting giant stompy robots. Probably going to have to wait a little bit. I want to finish these. I do still have some Battletech stuff to paint up, and I do have quite a bit of cab stuff to paint up. Which, by the way, the new Battletech miniatures are fantastic, and the new ones from CAV by Talon Games, now that they're using that dual cast stuff, that is going to be a game changer. If anybody has not checked it out, Reaper is doing it the same material. They're calling it Bones USA. And you can get the quality of a high-grade resin for the price of Reaper Bones Black. The promo figure they had for January, I have her right here, and I was playing around with color shift paints on her. This thing, when I went ahead and took it and put it next to some of the higher-end resin figures that I have, you could not tell the difference quality. It was that big of a difference. They are amazing, and they are going to change everything once word of those things gets out. Currently, she's the only one available. I cannot wait until they have more. I know once probably once February hits and they release the whatever the February promo is, I'm just going to order a whole bunch of them so I can go ahead and hopefully get them out to some clients. You know who you are. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the orcs from the Orogs. And yeah, the only thing he has on him is hands and face. So we're only going to paint hands and face. That's going to be easy for the skin. Which, speaking of CAV and Battletech, I do enjoy playing Battletech. I am looking forward to actually trying out CAV. CAV Strike Ops specifically by Talon Games, because it looks like it solves a lot of the issues that I have with Battletech. Not that I don't like Battletech. And that brings us to our main topic of conversation today. Today, you are going to hear me talk about my opinions and wax poetic about RPG systems and my ideas, views, and opinions on them. And some of these things are going to be what could be considered hot takes. Most of them probably will not be. But as always, it is your opinion. These are my opinions. You have your opinion. If you enjoy something, you enjoy it. And I am not one to tell you that you're wrong. And I'm going to be very clear about that up front, and I will repeat it multiple times. If I go ahead and comment that I do not care for an RPG system for one way, shape, or for one reason or another, or I have my belief that D&D and D20-based systems are really not... they're really not well suited for genres and things outside of your traditional epic D&D style fantasy. If you disagree with me, you are more than welcome to disagree with me. If you are having fun with your game and it involves cowboys in World War I, trench vets fighting orcs in a D&D system, via con Dios mi amigo, if you're having fun with that, by all means have fun with that. I mean, I am the guy who did a Christmas special game at one point where the player characters had to rescue Santa's naughty list from Krampus, who turned all the kids' names to naughty, gained infinite power, became kaiju-sized, and then had to proceed to defeat him by forming a Sentai team, forming robots together into Mecha Jesus, and fight him over the streets of Neo Bethlehem. Needless to say, there was peace. So yeah, I've done that. It was fun, so I am not allowed to criticize anybody when it winds up coming to their taste in role-playing games. It also looks like our little mini fan has dead batteries because it's not a plugin, which means that we are going to have some dry time here, and I do not know if I'm going to be able to finish these guys because of that. Well, we may go ahead and get some batteries in there in a little bit. Sorry for not being prepared today, guys. It has been a little bit of a week. But anyway, so here we are. We have the second coat of paint, and now you can see we have a nice, clean, clear coat. As always with the mantra, you want to go generally with 2 thin coats instead of 1 thick coat. We're going to go and keep the paint nice and thinned down. Now I don't always use them, and I don't always use the wet palette either. There are certain paint techniques that I don't use the wet palette for. My ogres for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, I did in an impressionist style, and I actually wanted the paint to be thick to show my brush strokes. These ones not so much because these are going to be more of a standard, quick and dirty tabletop job. So anyway, so we're going to go and start out, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about my personal opinions on different role-playing game systems. So, I will go and start off by saying, as a general rule, Dungeons & Dragons is not my favorite system. Yes, Alejandro Del has gone and brought out Savage Worlds is probably my favorite system right now, but we will get to that, and we'll get to why it is, and why I think you all should be checking it out. Cheers. So, first off, I have a very firm opinion that when it winds up coming to D&D, or when it winds up coming to RPGs in general, and this is kind of jumping into a little bit of the theory behind these things. By the way, we're going to start on their pants, and we're jumping into Reaper, Saddle Brown. This is on their Bones line, which I don't exactly know what the formula difference is. MechWarrior Shadowrun. Believe me, L West UCF, we are going to be talking about those because Shadowrun specifically is going to wind up falling into this discussion. Okay, come on. Are you really clogged up already? It's the one thing I don't like about dropper bottles. They have a habit of clogging up. Probably better off than what the paint pots do and just dry out. But it still gets real annoying from time to time, especially when you're constantly having to clear out the nozzle. There we go. Okay, we got a good bit on the wet palette. So, as far as a little bit of RPG theory goes, and this is always my take, I don't believe that there is such thing as a generic system. I know GURPS. Oh, I missed some skin on these guys. That'll happen from time to time. I'll miss a section. The Orogs aren't wearing shoes, so we are going to dip back into the snow shadow, and we are going to make sure to paint on these big, beefy legs that they got. They're not really wearing pants either. They're just kind of wearing a skirt. Man, how are they not cold? I'm running these things as snow orcs. I mean, the baseline assumption of this box is that they're frost orcs. I bet they is cold. All right, so I don't believe that there is such thing as a generic system. I think that there are genre systems, and I think that there are setting systems. What do I mean by this? Take a look at Savage Worlds. Yeah, kilt for the win. I don't even know if these things are kilts. I think they're mostly, actually, I guess they could be. God damn it, they're kilts. All right, so now you guys are also going to get to see me try to do a tartan pattern. So you're getting a bonus 2 for 1. Because what is a kilt if it does not have a tartan pattern? I'll tell you what it is. Not a kilt. I am not Scottish, but I do appreciate the Scots. They do make my favorite drink. And I'm... Thank you, Lady Witch Fox. Hashtag not my kilt. Thank you for joining in, by the way. Welcome to the stream. I do appreciate that the chat's a little bit more chatty today. Well, you get to listen to my hot takes, and as I knock that all over the place, you almost saw a disaster. All right, so brushes. First off, we're going to go and jump over. We're not doing a big honking flat brush because we are still doing base coats. We are going to get a round one this time, but it's going to be a large round one because we still don't need to be neat. And there's no reason to be not sloppy if you're being not sloppy. So I do believe very firmly that there are setting-specific RPG systems, and then there are genre-specific RPG systems. Now, what do I mean by this? Savage Worlds and GURPS both portray themselves as being setting neutral. They are generic systems, but I don't think they are. I think I've run a lot of Savage Worlds, and I am under the firm opinion that everything I run in Savage Worlds, no matter what I am running, whether I am running straight, purest Lovecraftian horror, and one day I'll get to the difference between Lovecraftian mythos and Derlethian mythos. If you really want to jump down a rabbit hole that I'm way too eager to tell people about. And then so everything in Savage Worlds winds up having a very pulp feel to it. No matter what you do, at some point, your characters are going to wind up feeling like Han Solo, Indiana Jones. I'm relatively sure that Savage Worlds is basically Harrison Ford, the role-playing game. That's a really good benchmark for it. It feels like the 1999 version of The Mummy with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, no matter what genre you're doing. And a lot of that is because of the dice mechanics. A lot of that is just the way the basic game is set up. There's a lot of reasons why. And I don't think that this is a bad thing. I happen to enjoy that very cinematic game style. But I understand that not everybody likes it. And that's one of the reasons why, if you don't like it, I don't recommend picking up Savage Worlds. If you ever play a game of GURPS, you'll understand what I mean by this too. GURPS gets extremely crunchy, and it attempts to be generic by having everything covered, but that in and of itself will influence the games you play. The mechanics of a game do influence the game. Maybe not necessarily totally in every instance, but in the aggregate, they will have a feel of how they associate with. It's the same concept that if you want to go and control foot traffic pattern, if you slope path by just a couple degrees, you will naturally have people walking in a certain direction. It just happens. It is the path of least resistance, and the same winds up applying to role-playing games. When I start talking about things like Pathfinder, I'll go further into this. So, on the other side of this, we don't have the genre-specific role-playing games. We have setting-specific role-playing games, and these are the ones where the setting is so intricately linked with the mechanics, and a lot of times the mechanics are so intricately linked with the setting that it's really difficult to separate the two of them. And this is where you have games like Shadowrun. I don't think you could necessarily run a Shadowrun game in a different system, even if you were using the same setting, and have it feel remotely the same. I am not a Shadowrun game master. I've played in a couple Shadowrun games and had an absolute blast. It is not the type of game I want to run. It's very complicated. You need to know pretty much everything to effectively GM the game, and I'm usually the GM. But Shadowrun is one of the only games I can say where if you play a mage in Shadowrun, you feel like a goddamn wizard. Yeah, Alejandro Del, feeling more like a cyberpunk kind of guy, and that's exactly the same thing. I know cyberpunk has a very different feel to it than Shadowrun does, and you're going to wind up running into different preferences no matter where you go. Man, this guy really doesn't have much in the way of pants. It's mostly another kilt. Huh? These guys have kilts. Hashtag not my kilt. All right, so. My hot take about all this and why I bring it up. Reading up to for a few games of Dark Heresy. Good stuff. You have fun with that. Dark Heresy is one I have not had the chance to run it or play it, and that as a setting specific one, it's to the point where the different Fantasy Flight role playing games for Warhammer 40k, they're there to do. They modify the system and they change it to have specific types of role-playing Warhammer 40k role-playing game. And I'm completely on board for that. I have no problem with this. It winds up really helping in, especially if people get the buy-in. But my hot take on this, as I'm roundabout saying, I think in circles, by the way, in case you can't tell. I believe that D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, all editions are a setting-specific system. I don't believe they're genre-specific. And why do I say that? If you take a D&D setting, you take Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, even you go really, really crazy out there and do probably one of the most variant one out there of Ravenloft. And yes, I'm calling it Ravenloft for a reason, which we'll get to. The moment you take it out of a D&D system, it stops feeling like D&D. And if you do any setting that is not normally D&D in a D&D system, it suddenly feels like D&D. If you want an example of this, take a look at the Wizards of the Coast Star Wars games from the early 2000s. Even when they made to Saga Edition, they started really breaking the D20 mold, and trying to at least, it still felt like Star Wars D&D. And the reason for that is because the game mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons in the D20 system are so inherently linked to elements of that game setting, and the implied setting that pretty much all D&D games have, that there is a cohesiveness that just doesn't translate as well to other settings. There's a couple mechanics that do this. One second, I'm going to get more scotch because I need a little bit more to be as loquacious as I need to be for this. So the first thing is hit points. And this is something I know that I'll get a lot of eye rolls about, and a lot of people will tell me that I'm wrong on. I don't like the hit point abstraction. I never have. I understand why D&D uses it, but I think it's legacy baggage at this point. But I think at this point, if you remove the hit points from it, it would no longer be D&D. Regardless of what the player's handbook says, hit points in D&D are just how much damage you can take before dropping. I know that they're supposed to represent a bit of luck. They're supposed to represent fate, ability to turn a blow. By the way, we're jumping into Glacier Blue. But end of the day, the mechanics are actually treated. The only thing that deals hit points to your character is damage. If it represented luck, then if somebody curses you, you should be taking a shitload of hit point damage. But you don't. D&D 4th edition did this, and look how that went. So the other things are the way magic is treated. I know I've seen variant magic systems where people start using things like spell points, and people start using things like mana and all that kind of stuff. But it's less about that and more so about the way the spells scale. And magic, no matter how you look at it, is integral to Dungeons and Dragons. It works even in the variant settings, like Ravenloft, even in a setting where they did their damnedest to remove magic from it. Dark Sun. It took one Dark Sun novel. In the first series they did, they introduced elemental clerics. Magic was supposed to be this weird, crazy, dangerous thing, and they wound up reintroducing a lot of it in the first story they did because they just couldn't remove it from the setting. This isn't a problem. I mean, this isn't bad. It's just that magic is part of D&D. Mana is just spell points. Yes, always GCF. Mana is, in fact, just spell points. It's not quite fancy in spellcasting, but it is. Yeah, you know what, Lady Witchfox, I will completely agree with you on that. I did not necessarily... I played a lot of 4th edition, and by the end, I think I had the same opinion of it. I didn't really care for it, because I think that they removed a lot of the mystery and wonder from the game. But that being said, I do think that 4th edition had a lot of really, really good ideas that just were kind of overpowered by the fact that it got so much hate. And I'll wind up getting to that. If you really pay attention, 4th edition fingerprints are all over 5th edition. All over 5th edition. It just wound up being some of the better ideas from 4th edition, even though there were some really good ideas that they wound up leaving behind, and I will get to those in a little bit. So, the other big thing that I have about D&D being a setting-specific game is it's related back to the hit points, and it's also related to spells, is how healing works. Natural healing in D&D 4th and D&D in all editions, it's not really necessarily a thing. Healing is easy. Every party worth their salt has a healer. And it's to the point where most people, when they're making characters, you make sure you have a healer. And when I say healer, I mean a healer. I mean somebody who can magically heal. I mean a cleric or a druid or now a bard. I like the fact that they expanded that role away from just clerics and druids. I know 4th edition tried to make it so that you could have like a martial healer to really go ahead and play that idea that hit points are morale. But it's even the warlords, it still felt like magic healing. It still felt like you're screaming at people and their wounds are closing. The same goes with resurrection magic. It still boggles my mind that whenever I'm sitting there introducing a lot of people who've only played D&D to other role-playing games like Savage Worlds, and they wind up asking, what happens if my character dies? I just say, you roll up another one. I mean, they're dead. They're not coming back. And if they do come back, like in Deadlands, you wish they hadn't. You wish to hell that they hadn't come back. We're going to paint his kilt this nice icy blue. And people get befuddled by it. They don't know what's going on. We got another viewer. I want to see who it is. Never mind. We don't have another viewer. No, we do. They're just not registered, apparently. I'm still figuring out this Twitch stuff. But yeah, it's the whole revolving door afterlife, the idea that death is temporary, and that's been in D&D for ages. I don't remember what edition first introduced. Yeah, house ruling character death. I mean, then this is something that realistically, I've heard a lot of people say that you should have a conversation with your players about this to let them know so they know what they're getting into. I'll flat out tell you, if you are playing in one of my games, character death is part of it. And that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, I think that from a personal standpoint, I think that if you take character death off the table, you remove a lot of the stakes of the game. people will start getting a lot more risky with their behavior, and they'll start acting a lot more out of character. In some ways, lack more in character, because especially if the character is like particularly brash or something that we would classify as suicidal idiocy. But the characters aren't going to feel nearly as real anymore. They're not going to have the same sense of preservation. Lady Witchfox, your players are not as 40k savvy as you, which is fine. It is perfectly fine. 40k is a pretty involved universe. I think the mystery for them will be fun. It will be fun, especially with Dark Heresy. That's the way to go. But if they die, tell them they can get a clone, but have to roll on the mutations table, which could be awful. Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Because especially if you are working for the Inquisition and you get a mutation, oh, that is awful. Oh, that is deliciously evil. Good on you. Good on you. I appreciate that. That's one of the reasons why I'm relatively sure I have a sadistic tendency in me, because why kill your player characters when you can watch them squirm? But I get ahead of myself with my evil tendencies. Yeah, I know that in Savage Worlds, a lot of superhero settings have a house rule called Heroes Never Die. Yeah, that's correct, Al West. You could, in fact, turn them into a servitor or a servo skull or something along those lines. I do like the idea of dead characters still being there, even if they're a literal or figurative ghost. I do know that having dead characters and having them be able to die leads to some incredible role-playing moments. And unfortunately, just with the automatic assumption of resurrection magic and how easy it is to get resurrection magic in D&D. I mean, D&D 5th edition, your first resurrection spell, Revivify, it's what? I think a 3rd level spell, you get that thing at level 5? And I could be wrong in that. Lady Witchfox talking about how her, or his, I don't know, whatever pronoun you like to use, logic is cloning is imperfect, things might be okay, or the clone could end up becoming something that could just kill the whole party and end the full game. They could. I mean, that's going a little bit farther than I probably would. But I do like the idea of having the rest of the party, especially an inquisitorial warband, never entirely trusting that cloned party member. Because really, if they're members of the Inquisition, should they be trusting everybody? Sorry, but should they be trusting anybody? I don't think so. Remember, innocence proves nothing. So anyway, getting back to it, especially when you wind up taking a look at a bunch of the different aspects, that most of them stem from the hit point progression, but a lot of it's really the level up scaling and the idea that a D&D monster, you're not going to face a Mind Flayer at level 1. Like, I'm not even going to say a Pit Fiend or a Ancient Red Dragon or anything like that. I'm going to say something simple, like something with a decent challenge rating, like a Mind Flayer. Challenge rating 8-ish, I think. At least they used to be. You just don't see them at low levels because they will immediately destroy the entire party in the event that they're encountered in combat. And if they do, you can't beat them. Just, you can't. Or if you do, it's going to require a whole lot of prep, some luck, and pulling punches on the part of the GM. You get games like Savage Worlds, where it's a much more pulp setting. No matter how you look at it, single shot can take that bad guy out. That influences the feel of the game, which isn't to say this is a bad thing. I'm not making a judgment on D&D. If that's the type of game you want to play, then D&D systems work perfectly for it. I just think that if you want to play something other than that specific D&D type setting, you're probably better off with a different system. You'd probably be better served by it. And don't be afraid to try different systems. You might find out that it's not as difficult as you think it is. Which brings me up to another point that is a hot take. D&D, any edition, is not a simple system. This is another one. It's a myth, and then I wind up hearing from people saying that a lot of people think that, oh, well, it's simple, it's easy. It's the barrier to entry is not high enough to stop people from getting in. Obviously, D&D was more popular than ever, and 5th edition is simpler than previous editions of D&D have been. It's still not simple, it's still on the moderate to complex end for role-playing games. Take a look at basic role-playing from Chaosium and Call of Cthulhu, which is based off of it. That is a simple system. You don't even know how to play. You don't even have to know how to play in order to play. L West UCF brings up, I am sure you never make your players distressed or make them sign deals with the devil with the rest of the party kills people stuck in tubs. Yeah, that was a story. So obviously this particular cat is somebody who I know personally, and was playing in a D&D game with me where I managed to sit on... They ran into a barb devil in kind of a sandbox open world game I was running, who offered them all sorts of fun stuff. All they needed to do was the simple task for them, which, of course, my players know me well enough to know that I am an evil bastard. All they had to do was deliver this letter and make sure to excoriate the moneylender and make sure he reads it. They don't have to know that you delivered it or anything like that. It just has to get delivered. Well, nobody took this guy up on the offer because they all knew it would be a terrible idea. Well, later on, they're working through, and they wind up going on a side quest to an aboleth slayer where they find a bunch of people who were stuck in these vats, basically being turned into aboleth thralls. This is right after they fought a whole bunch of weresharks because, of course, aboleths have weresharks. And I think 2 or 3 of the players wound up contracting lycanthropy from the weresharks. And this particular guy wanted it to be permanent. So he wound up, we're sitting there talking. But we're sitting there, we're not even talking. We're sitting there Facebook messaging while I'm sitting there jamming with people. Well, everybody's investigating these giant, tubes. And I just tell him, full stop, if you want to continue with this, I can make the lycanthropy natural, and you'll have full control over it. But I need a no ambiguity answer. Are you accepting this Barb Devil's deal? That you will deliver that letter to Iscariot the moneylender. And he said yes. Right after that, he discovered who was in those tubes. There are 3 different NPCs, one of whom was the moneylender. Now, the way the tubes were set up, the moment one of them was opened, the other 2 would be killed. So either you let all 3 of them become thralls, or you get to save one of them. And I gave them all local knowledge, so they had enough ideas of who was who, and basically who would wind up benefiting them the most. And of course, my friend here, L West UCF, wanted them to save the moneylender. While they were debating, eventually my instigator player just decided, you know what, screw it. We're just going to set them on fire. And they decided to open one of them that was like this pirate queen. So he now has to deliver a letter to a dead man. I sat on that particular thing of it being a side quest for a month and a half without saying anything. I had to stop the game while I cackled maniacally because I don't think I have ever pulled anything that good. It fell into my lap, and the thing I'm proudest of is the fact that I was able to not tip my hand. Because I am evil. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and keep painting all this. Might need to get another color to go ahead and paint the fletching on these arrows. Yeah, by the way, for those paying attention, we're moving into some more leather area with Olive Skin by Reaper. Yeah, and I should have done the gray first, but I didn't. But yeah, so I think that D&D as a system, it's not simple. It's moderate to complex, depending on which edition you're talking about, and depending on which derivation of D&D. Because I do consider Pathfinder to be D&D. It's close enough. I mean, it's based on an older system of D&D. And I really challenge anybody to go ahead and claim that D&D 3rd Edition is simple. If you believe that, I mean, I know I'm really big about people just having opinions and being able to have them, but if you believe that, then you are objectively wrong. It is a very complicated system. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And if that's the game you enjoy, that's the game you enjoy. I played the hell out of D&D 3rd Edition. But it's not simple. There we go. So usually my recommendation for this, just to get a better idea of it, branch out. I mean, try other systems. I mean, like you hear me talking in the chat about our friends here playing games of Dark Heresy, and I recommend Savage Worlds if you want something that's fast and pulpy. I love Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is fantastic for investigative horror. The system itself is simple. That is legitimately a simple system. It is fast, and it is brutally deadly. If you play a game of Call of Cthulhu, my biggest recommendation to you is don't get shot. I like having games where player characters wind up realizing in a big fat hurry exactly how lethal guns are, and then watching them try to turn a gun on a monster. And I laugh as it does absolutely nothing. Call of Cthulhu games are usually set in the 1920s. And depending on what point you are, you can just go down to your local drugstore and spend a couple bucks and buy a Thompson submachine gun. You can just have a Tommy gun. This is before the National Firearms Act was passed, so automatic weapons are completely legal and easily accessible. And I'm kind of under the attitude of saying just let them have it. Let them have it. They'll find out really, really quick in Monsters of Call of Cthulhu exactly how completely effing useless that gun is. Oh, I should paint your boat too. So I'm kind of like not talking about painting here. I'm just rambling on about also don't read books. Yes, L West UCF says also do not read books. But you kind of have to. You kind of have to. I mean, like, what happens if you don't read books? You don't wind up knowing anything, and then you die. Like, knowledge is power, even if it corrupts you and drives you mad. The first time you wind up finding a monster who's immune to bullets and immune to all damage other than spells, and the only spell that you have is the binding spell in that book, better hope you read it. Or somebody read it and is still sane enough to go ahead and actually cast the binding spell. So, anyway, where were we? Yeah, so different genre games. I mean, like, you can go and play them, try them out. I know, what's it called? Mech Warrior, the Battletech role-playing game, is very much a setting-based game. I don't think that you could necessarily remove a lot of that stuff, especially with how much of it revolves around, having a mech. Man, okay. I keep looking back, and it's like I keep seeing stuff that I'm missing on these guys on this code. I am obviously drinking. I need to slow down. I don't know if I'm going to get myself a second drink today. I think this one's kind of doing me good. I can very, very slightly hear the TV in the other room. My fiance is watching something. So, yeah, I think what's it called? I think like Pathfinder and D&D 3rd Edition are best if you really like that high level of crunch. I think that if you enjoy something more cinematic, then other games are better off for you. I know there was a little bit of a ruckus that was happening on YouTube recently when there was one of the big YouTubers for a channel called Taking 20 made a comment about why he's quitting Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And it was crazy the amount of hate that he got for it. And I don't understand that. It's like, okay, you don't like it. You've listed your reasons. We can disagree with it, but that doesn't mean that, like, you got to hate his video or say that he's a complete idiot for not liking it. You don't like it. You don't like it. Some people like that crunch, some people do not. Neither one is wrong. Okay, so we got that. We got his armband. Paint, 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 paint. All right. Oh, we got a couple people joining in. Hello there, Aten, I don't know how to pronounce that, and somebody called Community Showcase. Welcome to the stream. You are welcome to chat. You're welcome to go ahead and talk in. We're talking role-playing games right now, and my theory that there are no generic systems, that there are genre systems, because no matter how you slice it, your mechanics do influence the storytelling in some way, shape, or form. And if they don't, then you are doing some pretty heavy modification or GMing work to make it happen. Obviously, a GM can make the complete difference. I'm aware of that. But I do believe that certain systems kind of encourage certain methods of play. I mean, if you're not looking for a game that's all about stomping monsters and getting treasure, I don't think D&D is the game for you. I think there are other games that can do pretty much everything else better. Which, once again, is not to say that if you are using it, that's a chain around your belt, so that'll be metal. Which is not to say that if you do it differently that you are wrong, or you're bad, or you're somehow unvirtuous. You're not. By all means, keep having fun, and you are allowed to disagree with me. I'm not going to get upset at you for doing so. But I do think that if you have a lot of things you want to do to modify and move away from the traditional D&D style fantasy, there are just other systems that you can be better suited by. I mean, I don't know much about it, but I know Fantasy Flight Games did a system based off of their Rune Quest games for Terranoth. Don't know anything about it, but I know they did it. I am very curious to see the Savage Worlds Pathfinder. And I'm very curious to see exactly how the modifications they have for the system wind up affecting it. To see if it feels more like a Pathfinder, or if it's just a Savage Worlds in a fantasy setting. Because I like running Savage Worlds in a fantasy setting, but I would like a little bit more support for it. We're moving right along on these guys, as the Muppets would say. Moving right along, footloose and fancy free. Ready for the big timers, are ready for me. Moving right along. All right, look at more of this. I'm glad it seems like my video quality is still pretty good. Even somebody watching some Netflix on the same internet service. Come on, let's go ahead and keep everything in frame. You can do this, Party Bear. You can go ahead and get used to it. All right, so for those who did not tune in last week, these guys, I am starting out by doing just a base coat of all the different colors on them. And at this point, it is going to look like garbage. And if you follow along, or you do your own painting and you do this before shading, your minis are going to look crappy. And that's just the way it is. It's flat. It's what's called flat color. I haven't shaded it. I haven't highlighted it. I'm just getting a baseline to work off of. Okay. So currently, we have now 4 colors on these minis. We still have a lot of black showing. We got a lot of primer that we got to go over. But we are moving along pretty well. Let's go ahead and move on to the gray, which I should have done before that other brown. So by the way, this is Tempest Gray by Reaper. And this is something that can happen with wet palettes. I do have it kind of like curling up because it's an older piece of parchment paper. Realistically, every time you use the wet palette, you should be getting a new piece of parchment paper. I'm not doing that because I wasn't really properly prepared for this because I'm a dirtbag. Cheers to that. Scotch. All right, we have another user joining in. Hello, Bloodluster. Welcome to the channel. We are just painting minis and chatting about RPGs. So you are welcome to listen to my hot takes or not if you don't want to. As always, these are my opinions, and you are welcome to disagree with them, and you are not wrong. They are opinions, which means that they are completely subjective. Oh man, that was a weird thing that just happened with the brush. All right, well that was dead. I'm not even gonna put it in frame. All right, so we're gonna move on to our gray. Let's go ahead and take this. Where did I put my paper towel? There it is. It is hiding behind a bunch of garbage that I have on my station. Keep your station clean. Don't be like me. So, other systems that you may want to try out and enjoy. I know if you really like things to be narrative and fast-paced. I have not played it. I have one of the games for it. I've heard very good things about Fate. Fate is very heavily narrative-based, and a lot of it is based on can you figure out how to use your keywords and abilities the way you want to. Really Rules Light uses fudge dice, which I don't exactly know how I feel about. I still kind of feel like they could have just done 2d6 and called it a day on that. The one that I have, I backed from a Kickstarter a little bit ago, called Fate of Cthulhu, which is basically the Terminator, except instead of Skynet, they have Cthulhu, which I thought was an interesting point. It's not really Lovecraftian horror. I don't even think it's really Derlethian horror. It's kind of its own thing, which is fine, but I thought it was a cool concept, so I backed it. And the system looks pretty interesting. Looks like a fun game. There is a system out there that looks really, really interesting. It's I think it's kind of like I don't know exactly what the genre is. It's called Knives in the Dark. And it is, I know it focuses on some sort of a Victorian thing. I believe it's like kind of like a steampunk fantasy setting. But it is all about heists. And the cool thing the thing that sounds so cool about it is that it you start the session at the beginning of the heist, at the beginning of the crime, the job. The secret ingredient is crime. And then whenever you get to something where you would have had to do legwork on it, it treats the game like a flashback. So it's like, okay, well, we're breaking in. I'm going in just like as the face, straight in the front. And then let's go and do a flashback of how I'm getting past the guard. And then you do a role-playing scene and you find out how successful you were at planning, and then you go back to where you were and have to deal with it. I think it's a fantastic way to do heists. That way it removes a lot of the onus from the GM of having to be able to completely plan for everything and have everything set up with all the different legwork you can do. Makes it much more improvisational and reactive, which is kind of how I prefer to GM. Oh, we got a new person, DB Helderhammer. That sounds ridiculous, but super fun. It does sound super fun. I mean, like, it's every time I hear a review about Knives in the Dark, it basically makes me just want to look at them and say, "You son of a bitch, I'm in." And it really winds up feeling like that. It does sound properly ridiculous. It sounds like tons and tons and tons of fun. That's the type of thing I'd love to run. It's kind of like a little bit of a boutique thing. I don't know if it's still around, but there's a game out there called Dread, where it was a really, really short thing. Your character is just a 13-question survey. Those are all your game mechanics. Like one of the questions that you have to answer is, so where'd you get those shoes? Because you can learn a lot about somebody by their shoes, apparently. And the cool thing about Dread is it doesn't use dice. It uses a Jenga tower. And this is like slasher survival horror type stuff. Which means, by the way, welcome Commander Root and DB Heldenhammer. We are going to be chatting role-playing games and tabletop gaming and painting some orcs from Steamforged miniatures. So the cool thing about Dread is that it's supposed to be like a slasher survival horror type deal. Whenever you do something where there would be a chance of failure, you have to pull from the Jenga tower. You're not rolling dice. You're pulling from a Jenga tower. And if it collapses, you don't fail, your character dies. Which winds up really fitting if you imagine that this is a Friday the 13th game. You know, Jason Voorhees is out there, and if he gets you, you're not going to live. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be a Bruce Willis type diehard cop. If Jason Voorhees gets to you, you're dead. If the Jenga tower falls, you reset it. And the brilliant part about this is that if you've ever played Jenga, you know it's not a matter of if it falls. It's a matter of when. The thing is going down eventually. And if it starts getting really rickety, especially at a particularly tense time, you have the option of voluntarily knocking over the tower to automatically succeed but still die in the process. I don't know if it's the type of thing that I would want to do as a regular basis, but I think for something like a Halloween game, that would be amazing and tons of fun. There's another one that I've really been interested in because it's a game from the engine powered by the Apocalypse, where you have a character, but most of your character is in what's called a playbook, which I'm not exactly sure how it works. But the game itself is called the City of Mist. And I know the adventures themselves are pulp noir in this kind of alternate alternate universe urban fantasy setting, where the characters are all playing various mythic people, whether you can be like Achilles or something like Jack Sprat or Sherlock Holmes or Alice from Alice in Wonderland. And that's who you really are, but to everyone else, you just look like a normal everyday person. And you have to kind of juggle how deep into the mythic persona your character wants to go if you want to deny it and maintain your humanity, or embrace it, gain all this power, but lose your humanity. And apparently it's a really big juggling act that you have to deal with in this really gritty pulp noir setting. The city itself is not named. It is just the city. And there's all sorts of really weird things about this city. Like downtown, there's this giant skyscraper that everybody remembers having been in at one point, but it has no doors. Which that just sounds delightfully creepy to me. It's the type of thing that makes me really want to play it. But apparently there's a lot of really cool stuff in the setting. It's a big, thick book, and it's something that I've been meaning to pick up. Yeah, pulp noir, DB Heldenhammer. None of it was what he expected. Pulp noir and mythical figures, sure. Sounds great and fun and surreal. It does sound super surreal. I mean, it's the type of thing where it's like, this is just not what you would expect it to be, and I love that. I love it when things are strange and weird in delightfully unexpected ways. I don't know if it's the type of thing you'd want to run like really extended campaigns in, but apparently the setting is pretty well fleshed out and something you can really dig your teeth into. I heard about that, and I was like really all about it. It's kind of like the Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood, which are other really heavy role-playing based games. I missed something on this guy, which, by the way, as I'm sitting here painting this gray, I am also painting the orc's hair in this gray. And that is because I'm going to be darkening it up with a contrast paint. And we'll get to exactly what that is later. I know I'm not focusing nearly as much on the painting today. I'm just rambling on about RPGs. But I like RPGs. They're a lot of fun. And you can do a lot with them. I still want to continue fleshing out that idea that I had. I don't know if I'd keep it in Savage Worlds, but the idea that it's a fantasy setting where unfortunately everybody is kind of having to play a dwarf. If you're not a dwarf, you're an outsider, which uses the racial creation system. But it's the idea that it's this dwarven kingdom under the mountain where everybody, basically something happened and the dwarves dug too deep. And over just about a year, something happened, and only the kingdom closest to the surface now remains. And then everybody basically plays different types of dwarves that have finally gotten to the point where they're trying to retake the deeper kingdoms. And a big thing that I was playing with was really diving deep into this dwarven culture and exactly how varied and, really I was doing as a world building exercise, but I would still love to actually run it in a Savage Worlds campaign. Or another system, I don't know. But the idea of retaking these kingdoms, so it's kind of almost like a more optimistic version of the Deep Roads and Dragon Age, if you ever remember playing that video game. Yeah, I do. I really, DB Heldenhammer says he still wants to see more of those dwarves. I know I was doing a lot of thought experiments with him a while ago, and I would love to see more of it too. If I could ever just, really pull myself to stick with a project like that. I mean, I have a hard enough time sticking with a painting project, especially with how stressful work has been. All right, so let's just keep on doing more gray. Gray. I'll get to the point where I'll sit there and wax poetic about Games Workshop washes really soon here with how they're liquid talent. Yeah, DV Heldenhammer says you could always use more dwarves. You can always use more dwarves. I firmly believe in the life of a great big, bushy, dwarf-like beard. So, yeah, what else have I heard that sounds really interesting? Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood. Apparently they use the same system, and I don't know how much I would be about this, because I think it's moving a little bit too heavily into the narrative stuff for me. I know they use the same system, and apparently Tales from the Loop has an Amazon series about it that's pretty damn good, which the fact that there's an Amazon series based off of a tabletop role-playing game makes me happy. Even if most people don't realize it's a tabletop role-playing game. It's supposed to be adventures in the 1980s that never was. So everything is supposed to be really like 80s culture and whatnot. Very Stranger Things, but it is... but they're like robots and automatons and like all that kind of stuff walking around. And I know the concept of it is that your kids are basically like middle schoolers and you're very much kids on bikes type deal. And it's interesting that you can only recover your status conditions that take the place of damage by having an emotional anchor that you have to interact with, or going and having a scene of bonding with another player character. And if you are really, really deep into really, really strong role play, this sounds amazing. I don't know if I'm that deep into it, so I don't know if I would enjoy it. I know Things from the Flood is the same world 10 years later, where it's supposed to be in the 90s that never was. And instead of it being like elementary schools to middle schoolers, you are high school kids, you're teenagers. So things actually can be a little bit darker, a little more dangerous. And instead of it being a scene of bonding, you're supposed to resolve a scene of tension. So whether that is like a rivalry, any sort of romantic, sexual tension, that kind of stuff, if you got the right kind of group, this game sounds like it could be pretty freaking awesome. But you would need the right type of group for it. And I don't know if I want to get like that really deep into role-playing and serious on one of my games. So, needless to say, I mean, like, if you are sticking to D&D because it's what you know, there is a wealth of really, really interesting stuff out there. And it's really cool stuff that you can play around with. Yeah, DB Helderhammer says definitely role-playing is usually a hard thing to really go into with a pickup group. It's super hard with a pickup group. And honestly, like, the biggest issue that I have, even with, like, my main group that I'm, like, running currently Deadlands for, is that most of the time, when we get together and play games, I mean, like, we're not looking for anything really serious. We're looking to sit down, have some pizza, drink some beers. Well, I'm going to be drinking some beers. I don't think anybody else in my group is going to be drinking beers because they're apparently a bunch of teetotalers and cider drinkers. But you just want to sit down, have some drinks, eat some pizza, relax, and tell dick and fart jokes with your friends. And if you really want to get into a deep role-playing experience, you can. I just don't think that's necessarily the direction I want to go in. I'm much more casual about it. But yeah, that's definitely a way to go if you want to get really deep into it. Because I'd imagine you can have some amazingly cathartic experiences. And role-playing can be a cathartic experience that you can use to just deal with shit in your life. I love Scotch. Scotchy, Scotch, Scotch. All right, so let's take a look back at these guys. I think we are getting pretty close to having all of that primer covered. We're probably not going to have all of it covered just because I'm kind of a dirtbag and I get lazy. We're going to move to the metal. I know last week I was using Reaper Tarnished Steel. I'm moving up. I'm going a little bit lighter than that. Not Tarnished Steel, Blackened Steel. I'm moving up to Reaper Shadowed Steel, partially because I know it's actually cleared. But also the OROGs have these really big chest plates on them. If you take a look, and it's a nice big area, and I'm actually going to need to do a little bit highlighting on there, so I want it to be a little bit lighter, just because I wasn't really super happy with how that metal turned out last time. And like I said, these Orc Berserkers, if you can see that, just looks kind of plain. Side note, even though I am very, very happy that those Orc Gladiators are female orcs, I do wish there were more female orcs in this set. I think that out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sculpts, the fact that one of them is female just feels a little bit off. But that's also just kind of a personal, I believe the term is bugaboo that I've had about the fact that there's just not that very good representation of female miniatures, and it's getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. It's not where it should be. I mean, I know that one of the reasons for this is that it's a lot of the miniatures end of things is kind of not funneled by role-playing games, but by the miniature war games, and those are very much a boys' club. To the point where I remember that there was a guy who was doing a study about sexual harassment in tabletop gaming, and he managed to get a really good data sample size to come up with some conclusions amongst convention role players and card gamers, but he could not get it for war gamers because there weren't enough women there to form a sample size, which is unfortunate. DB Heldenhammer, agree wholeheartedly about female miniatures, especially with the less obvious ones like orcs or even dwarves. Yes, absolutely. There are tons and tons of lady elves. There are very few lady orcs. And that's disappointing. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I do like Reaper. They are better about it, but even then, I mean, like, when you get into the monstrous creatures, the quote-unquote monstrous humanoids, orcs, goblins, gnolls, all that kind of stuff, kobolds, you find there's a dearth of them. I mean, with how many orc miniatures there are, and the fact that I have to go out of my way to find a single female orc, when everything that I wind up reading about fantasy orcs in D&D indicates that they're very much a might makes right. So they'd probably be in the territory where if there's a female orc that can beat up anybody else, that they'd probably be just as recognized as everybody else. I don't think they have a concept of sexism. But that's just my personal take on it. I'm sure that if you're keeping orcs as the kind of traditional dark race and you want to incorporate a lot more darker themes into it, then yeah, you can have all the sexism you want in it, which is actually another interesting point to bring up, that from a personal standpoint, I don't have a problem having a lot of darkness in my games, but I try to keep most of the things that would be like real life darkness, with the idea that like the real monster is man. I try to keep that stuff out of my games because even though I do like horror games, there's an element of lightness to it, and you can get real awkward with your characters. I mean, I don't know what my players have gone through, and if I'm involving a lot of like sexual assault and rape and whatnot, you can get people real uncomfortable real fast, and I just like things to be a little bit more casual than that. And obviously, if your table's okay with it and you've had those conversations, you can have some amazing role-playing moments. But from a personal standpoint, I prefer to keep my evils to be very much in the supernatural territory, or the so comically dark that they're difficult to believe that these things could be real. But that's just me. I don't know, I might have to get myself a snack. I'm feeling kind of hungry again. Let's go ahead and make sure to get this belt chain because it is a chain on your belt. Well, guys, thank you very much for being active in the chat. I do appreciate it. It helps me to not just have to sit here and talk to myself for 3 hours. All right, so one other trick that I do. All right, well, thank you very much. DB Heldenhammer has to bow out for a bit. Best of luck. Keep up the good work. Orcs are looking sweet. Thank you much. You know I love painting my orcs, no matter what type they are. And I appreciate you tuning in and hopping in, even if just for a little bit. Let's take a look, and doesn't look like we have anybody else who is necessarily new, so I'm just going to keep on sitting here chatting and talking like a do. So yeah, the other big thing that I have about tabletop role-playing games that I will recommend as far as if you are looking for certain things that other games may serve you better, I have seen a lot of people who really like the idea of big battles. And I kind of wind up thinking that if you are the type of people and you really like the idea of war stories and having these great big set piece battles between armies, you may be... Oh, wait, that's the wrong color. Haha, by the way, don't mix metallic and non-metallic paints. It does not end well. If you really like those big set piece battles and you keep throwing them in, and I've played games, especially when I was in the Navy, of people who would just time after time after time again have big battles. And for those people, I kind of say, if you really, really like these big battles, there's a game I'd like to introduce you to, and it's called Warhammer, where all you do are these big battles. And if you say that you would prefer it to be narrative focused and storytelling, well, I got news for you, buddy. Warhammer is not a competitive game. It is a storytelling narrative game, which is another thing. This thing about picking the game that best suits the type of game you want to play, that applies to miniatures games too. And I contest, and I will say from the bottom of my heart to the top of the mountaintops, that if you really want a narrative miniatures game, Warhammer is the game for you. If you want a competitive miniatures game, Warhammer is not the game for you. I don't think Warhammer works well in a competitive environment at all. There are people who do it. I don't think I've ever been to a Warhammer tournament that I have particularly liked. The game has very little to no balance. The rule system is not particularly well thought out for competitive play. It takes a long time to play. It takes a lot of space. It's just not very good for competitive play. If you want competitive play, play War Machine. Play Infinity. Those things are great for competitive play. Warhammer is, however, superlative for narrative play. If you want to go ahead and have a Forge the Narrative type experience, do a campaign, do a narrative game, all that kind of stuff, Warhammer is your game. It's great at that. It's one of the only miniatures games I've ever seen where it does not have a problem with you completely altering rules to fit a scenario and just letting the rules get out of the way of the story. It is great for that. Plus, the miniatures look sick. Eventually, those tuning in after I finish these guys, I might do some of my Warhammer miniatures, and you will see what I'm talking about. They are just they're just leaps and bounds ahead of pretty much everybody else in the industry. I should do more work on my Tyranids on this, and you can see instead of me doing this what's it called, this tabletop standard that I'm doing here, doing more of a showcase standard like I will on my Tyranids. They're the ones that I got on the Games Workshop website on the product description. Mostly because I did a very, very careful gradient of yellow. Which, let me go ahead and actually reach into a display case and show you guys on the camera what I'm talking about. You get to see my hairy legs. Okay, let's go and get this back. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. Yellow is usually considered very difficult and tricky to paint. And that's because yellow paint sucks. This is a guy that I did that's still kind of a work in progress because I got more work to do on him. But, obviously I am not scared of painting yellow, and it's kind of become in a lot of ways a little bit of a signature. Let's go and play around with the lighting on this so you can get a better view of it. All right, well, I'll post some pictures of it. I'll probably at some point, if people really want it, I'll do a tutorial on different ways to paint yellow, and I'll have like the same miniature or something very similar and a couple different techniques. So you can see how I paint my signature pain in the butt color. Let's move this up a little bit. Apparently, the yellow is just difficult to work with because yellow paints suck. The pigment in yellow paint they can't be synthesized. The old one that was synthesizable apparently causes cancer, so they can't use it anymore. So they skimp on the pigment. And when you skimp on the pigment, you skimp on the coverage. So yellow can take coat after coat after coat after coat to look good. All right, so what are we doing next? We've got our metal, we've got our icy blue, we've got our wood, our leather, our gray. We need to go ahead and do the trim. Now, because these guys have all these bony growths coming out of them, and the trim I'm doing in my ivory color, I'm going to wait to do that until after I do my shading. So I think that probably means that we are a little bit early and we are ready to do our shading. So we're going to go and start that out. Let's go ahead and pull out the Griff Charger Gray Contrast. Alternately, if you don't have the Griff Charger Gray, Coella Green Shade by Citadel can work too. Now, contrast paints have a technique to them, but otherwise they are liquid talent like the shades are. They're going to go from looking really, really crappy to holy crap, that looks pretty decent in very short order. So we're going to go ahead and take a decent sized brush, which, by the way, you see me doing this and actually leaving the brushes in the paint pot. If it is a decent brush, do not do that. I'm only doing that because it's these crappy brushes. Quite frankly, I don't care if they suck, because they just suck to begin with. So we're going to go and apply this to all the skin. And because I'm going to do this guy's big breastplate a little bit differently, I'm going to apply it to that as well. It's going to be a slightly different color in order to go and kind of tie it in a little bit more with the miniature itself. Now he has like an arm wrap here. We're going to go and do it in that the same kind of off-white as the rest of his. And we're going to make sure to get it all up in here and make sure it's all in all the recesses. Now, one of the very important things that I said about contrast paints last time, and I said about washes, and I'm going to say it again because it is worth repeating because it's really important. Your paint must be 100% dry before applying a layer of a wash, shade, or contrast. If not, you're just going to have your layer, all that beautiful painting you're doing, it's just going to run together and it's going to be like applying a really weird, milky, thin layer of paint. Don't do that. Don't ruin your work. You work hard on these things. I'm sure you do. If you're here looking for painting advice from somebody who's an okay painter, then you are probably really proud of your work, or you just need a lot of help, in which case I'm here to help you. Okay, we'll go ahead and apply it to the icy blue as well. We're going to go through a lot of this. Contrast paints and shades are one of the paints where you do tend to go through it. If you have one that dries out, I'm sorry, but the odds of that happening are pretty slim. All right, so next let's go ahead and get it on your feet, your knee, any exposed skin. Not necessarily all the metal, just the metal on his breastplate. And then we are going to have a nice generous layer on the base. We're going to make sure it gets in all those nooks and crannies. God, I got to move my camera. I got shifted a little bit when I thumped it. I done thumped it. All right, let's go and do that. Close enough so you don't have to look at my hairy legs. All right, let's make sure we got all the areas. And then we're going to put him over there to dry. Pick up the other one. I really like these Orogs. They are my type of thing. They're big, they're brutal, they got big, burly muscles. Because that's the thing that I like painting the most. I like painting skin and big, burly muscles. I'm pretty sure if they made a miniature of Arnold Schwarzenegger back in his heyday, I would love painting that. That's the kind of stuff that I like doing. You give me like 27 different versions of Conan, I'm going to be one happy painter. All right. Now we are going to go over the chest plate again with the black after this is dried. Maybe, if it dries fast enough. It might not. Probably won't. But it's going to be an interesting thing. You can layer washes and contrast paints. And actually, over metals, just layering washes is a really good technique to use. I'll go ahead and show you a tutorial. I'll show you guys a tutorial down on one day. How you can just paint with a really, really bright color, and then let's layer down washes progressively until you get the depth you want. It's more of a watercolor technique, but it works fantastically. Technically speaking, contrast paints are all more watercolor techniques. All right, let's go and get this on. Make sure your face is covered. Your face is covered. So yeah, anybody else in chat wants to chime in if you have a favorite role-playing game system or something that people might not necessarily know about? I mean, like I keep up with things sort of. I do like hearing about them. The Savage Worlds Pathfinder Kickstarter is in, I believe, its second week now. They've raised $250,000, which I hope they'll get more than this. They did kind of stall out because it looks like all the Savage fans kind of posted. I don't know if the Pathfinder cats are going to be nearly as big on it, but I really hope they do well. I mean, the people at Pinnacle are good people. So. All right, so these orcs, we're going to go ahead and keep up with the faces. Paint the skin. Get a little bit on the hair, don't worry about it. Paint anything that is that ice blue and anything that is this skin. I'm going to avoid the gray if possible. Well, I do hope everybody is enjoying the stream, even if it is just me kind of ranting and rambling and whatnot. But yeah, if you are exposed to primarily D&D and you want to go and try something else, go ahead and give it a shot. I mean, even if you're just like having a one-shot or trying it out, there's some really interesting systems out there, really interesting settings. You'd be surprised what you can find if you're willing to go outside your comfort zone even just a little. It's kind of like I know this, that our viewer, Lady Witchfox, was saying, that she doesn't think D&D 4th edition deserved the hate that it got, and I kind of agree with that. It's not to say that I particularly enjoyed it. I did for a while, but there were a lot of aspects of 4th edition that I think were actually very good. I think 4th edition had a pile of really, really good ideas with just focusing on certain ones that were just, I'm not going to say they were poorly executed because they weren't. I'm going to say that they just didn't feel like D&D. One of the attempts for 4th edition that they really focused on was the idea that you can pull a character from one table, drop him into another at the same level, and have it be completely fine. There was very little in the way of variation in that regard. Even though, like, if you had a couple different level 4 characters, they could be very different characters, but from table to table, each character would function because you basically had the same allotment of points to work with for each of them. The big issue that I had with it is that it was very combat-based. I think that all D&D is very combat-based. I think this was I think 4th edition, even though there were elements of it that I didn't like, I think it was probably the most brutally honest edition of D&D there was when it comes to what the game designers believe that D&D is about. And I do kind of agree with it that D&D is about killing monsters and stealing their stuff. If you use the rule of thumb that page count shows you what the designers think the game is about, D&D devotes an entire book to monsters. It devotes a large section of another book to the stuff you can steal from monsters. And it devotes a very large section of the other book to how you kill monsters. I think 4th edition was the first edition to be truly honest that D&D is about killing monsters and taking their stuff. The problem is the system didn't really support much beyond that. So it was entirely killing monsters and taking their stuff. When most games of 3rd and 5th, 2nd and 1st, you'll also throw in a murder mystery every now and then, or dungeon exploration, or some sort of social encounter and that kind of stuff. And that's just, it wasn't nearly as much the focus of 4th edition. 4th edition, most everything you did involved combat, almost everything involved combat, while the other editions do still have support for social interaction and whatnot. All right, we will get a small refill of something once I'm ready to get these washes drying. So let's go and move on to our next wash. Agrax Earthshade, Liquid Talent. We don't need this right now, so let's go ahead and put this on top so we can preserve some of that paint that we've got on there. So by the way, if you do have a wet palette, even if you do have a piece of parchment paper that's kind of buckling like mine is, if you put the lid on, that'll wind up stopping a lot of that from happening. So if you did tune in last time, you are noticing I'm doing a few things differently. I'm not doing the dry brush of the Vampiric Mist on the base like I did on these guys before applying the wash, because I don't think that's really going to make much of a difference. And I am all about saving time and effort when I can. I'm also not doing the layer of undead flesh on the hair or the polished bone on the hair before doing the gray, because once again, I don't think you're going to notice the difference. And that is one thing that you'll find that I do is if you're not going to notice the difference, I don't do it, especially not on these grunts. Now, when I get over to, by the way, I'm using my nice brush because now I want control, because I don't want to go over the areas I've already gone when I'm applying my Liquid Talent. Yeah, so these guys, because they're all going to be just more of a baseline tabletop quality, I don't have a problem skipping steps and all that kind of stuff. Once I get to the Orc King himself, you're going to see a very different process. I'm thinking probably next week I'm going to go take care of the orcs riding the polar bears. The following week I'm going to take care of the odds and ends, which will be the orc cooks, as well as the other brewmaster and the shaman. And then the following week, so probably about halfway to 3/4 of the way through February, I'm going to tackle the Orc King himself. And when I tackle the Orc King himself, we've got a lot of buildup. Sorry to switch midstreams on you. We got a lot of buildup right here. So I'm going to go ahead and dry out my brush, and I'm going to go and soak up some of that contrast paint so it doesn't pool too badly. Because last thing we want is the contrast paint to run into another color of wash. Because then the whole thing will just mix up together, and then you'll just get all looking muddy brown. So if you paint a lot, have you ever noticed that whenever you mix colors enough, everything just turns brown? So what happens if you mix 3 primary or 3 tertiary colors and 3 primary or 3 secondary colors? You just get brown. So anyway, 4th edition. I think 4th edition had a lot of really, really good ideas. I think not necessarily the way that they were implemented, but I think the idea of healing surges was fantastic, with the idea that we are limiting the amount of healing that you can do in a given day. And that's something that I know that you can tell if somebody actually played 4th edition by asking them about what healing surges were. Because most people think that healing surges were just... Sorry, the people who didn't play 4th edition typically will think that healing surges were just a way that everybody could heal at any given time. And everybody did have the ability to take a second wind during combat, but very rarely did people do that because it cost you your action. What healing surges did was they limited the amount of healing you could do in a day, because pretty much all healing required you to spend one of these healing surges, and you did not have an infinite supply of them. That I thought, the idea that you are, because normally D&D characters, on how much you can do in a day, you're only limited by how many spells and how many hit points you have. Those are the only really two governors on how much adventuring a party can do in a day. The idea that you are, like, spells are already limited. Excuse me. But the fact that you are directly limiting how much healing a player character can do in a day, that was revolutionary. Nobody's ever done that. Healing surges, specifically like almost the second wind thing, and the ability to spend them between combat, did make it into 5th edition. They're just called hit dice. And they take a lot of the strain off you requiring to have a healer. And that was the cool thing that the way healing surges were implemented did, that you didn't have to have a healer. I mean, it certainly helped, but you didn't have to have one. And I appreciated that. The other thing, and I know that this kind of, it's to a lesser extent made it into Pathfinder 2nd edition, and complete caveat, I have not played Pathfinder 2nd edition, nor have I owned the rulebook, nor have I read the rulebook. At some point, I probably should. But I know that a lot of people have hailed the action economy in Pathfinder 2nd edition as being wonderful and very clear cut. And a lot of people in the Pathfinder community are going to be very upset at me for saying this. It is, as far as I'm concerned, a more clunky way of the action economy from D&D 4th edition. I wish they kept the action economy from D&D 4th edition. I think that the action economy was the best bit of game design that they did. Everybody had one of each type of action: a move action, a standard action, and a minor action. Most big things were standard action. Move actions were typically used to move. Minor actions were typically used to activate a special ability or something along those lines. Or do something else minor, like draw or sheath a weapon, which most people just completely ignore that does technically have to happen in RPGs. The thing about this is that you could exchange a standard for a move. So if you don't want to attack, you can move twice. You could exchange a move for a minor. So if you want to activate 2 special abilities but not move, you could. If you want to exchange a standard for a minor, you can do that. If you just want to take 3 minor actions, you can absolutely do that. So consequently, there was just a strict limiter on how much crap could be done in a single turn. And then you would get what was called a reaction. This would be like opportunity attacks. And that was useful because you could decide if you want to take an opportunity attack or do this other cool reaction you had, like maybe a shield block or something like that. It was the single best part about the D&D 4th edition system, and I wish they kept it. If I was ever to go ahead and design a role-playing game, you'll know it because I will keep that exact same system. It worked. It worked brilliantly, and it put a natural limiter on how much people could do in a turn, and added so much to the game balance between the classes. The basic power structure of people have a different encounter, at will, and daily abilities, which would recharge on encounter abilities would recharge on a short rest. Dailies would recharge on a long rest. D&D 5th edition still has these, and they were another really good idea. The issue that I had with them was that they applied all of them uniformly over the initial classes, so that a wizard would get the same number of encounter, at will, and daily powers as a fighter, and they use them in the same way. And that basically it wound up making it so feel like everybody was using magic in some way, shape, or form, and that's not what it was. I think like they should have given fighters a lot more at will and maybe a couple encounter powers for the really big ones, while wizards I think should have been focused on dailies. And I think that would have done a lot to help preserve the flavor that was perceived to be lacking in fourth edition. The other thing that I really like about 4th edition, and I do recommend keeping it, the idea that monsters have levels besides their level. There were 4 different general category of monster when it came to power level. You had minions, standard, elite, and solo monsters. And 5th edition kept the solo monster thing to a point where some monsters will have legendary actions and layer actions, which I think is a good idea. And if you take a look at the encounter design and the game design over the 4th edition life cycle, for solo monsters, it changed significantly over the years that 4th edition was around. But the idea that you can bring in minions, and the only thing that's different about a minion is that they don't roll dice on damage, they have a set damage value, and they only have 1 hit point. Now, a lot of people criticize it by saying, well, how can this giant only have 1 hit point? And it's like, well, I'll tell you how. It's because hit points aren't just damage. They're just your overall ability to survive in combat. And the whole point of a minion is that you just chew through them. If you had 4-player characters and you're fighting just minions in the party, in the encounter, I believe it was something like you had to fight through 20 of those things. So can you imagine when you're outnumbered 4 or 5 to 1 and you're hacking through these things, how good that must feel to you? It makes you feel like an action star superhero, which is what a lot of D&D is. It's empowerment fantasy. And I thought that was a good idea. I thought you should keep that in 5th edition. I mean, you can introduce it pretty easily. Just have, a lower level monster, just have them so they only have 1 hit point. If they get hit, they're dead. If you have an ability that deals half damage on a miss, they don't take any damage. You have to hit them. But if you do hit them, they're toast. They can still have a huge effect on combat, but they just don't last that long. And I thought that was a great idea, especially when you get like boss monsters that would summon just a shitload of minions. Really, really cool. It's a lot of fun. And then you had elite monsters, which typically would have a reaction of some sort and something to help break the economy, like maybe a minor action that was an attack. And they were supposed to be the equivalent of basically 2 standard monsters. The other thing that I like that 4th edition did with monsters is they gave them roles. Like they would say that, this type of kobold is a skirmisher while this ogre is a brute. And it wasn't necessarily a huge thing, but it gave you a general idea of how to fight, how to use them in combat. And I appreciated that. It made for DMing a lot easier. Encounter design was a lot easier because they introduced something called the compendium. In the compendium, and I wish to God 5th edition had something like this. I've heard that maybe D&D Beyond is like this, but I'm not entirely sure. It was basically an online feature that had every monster for any D&D 4th edition product available, browsable on the internet. And what I would do to prepare is I would just go ahead and download these things and print them up. Because, by the way, here's another thing. A lot of people talk about how do you speed up your D&D game. The trick answer is you really don't. That's another thing about D&D that I have as a criticism. D&D is not a fast system. It is not a system that lends itself to fast play, especially at higher levels. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some of this black wash to the hair just to see how it goes. Not too good, so I'm going to stick with the gray. Okay. The key to making a game fast is not about... A lot of people think, well, it's about dice rolling and player behavior and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, to a point it is. But if you really want to make your games fast, reduce the bookkeeping. This, more than anything, go ahead and pay attention sometime when you're playing a game. How often do you have to look things up? If you have to look things up a lot, you are playing a game that's being slowed down by bookkeeping. That's actually the biggest thing. Savage Worlds is not necessarily a simple system. It's an elegant system. It's simpler than D&D for sure, but that's not really saying much. The big thing about Savage Worlds is that it cuts back on the bookkeeping and how much reference you have to do during game. Most games of Savage Worlds I play, I rarely, if ever, need to actually do any bookkeeping. I don't need to open the book. I mean, go ahead and imagine the last time you played a game of D&D and you never had to open a book. Any of them. Monster Manual... Player's Handbook, I find the DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't typically get referenced in game. It's usually referenced out of game. But imagine if none of your players ever had to open a player's handbook to reference a rule or a special ability. How much faster would your game go? That's why Savage Worlds moves fast. So what I used to do in 4th edition, and I tried to do in 5th edition, it's just not as easy, was I would just have all of my monster stats printed up beforehand, and I would just copy and paste them from the compendium or print up the pages from the compendium. And just by doing that, things would be faster. My players would have all their power cards, even though I had tons and tons of powers. They would have them all printed out in front of them. They would never have to open a book, and that's how we kept the game moving. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have indecisive players. That can happen. What I'm saying is that when you get to a wizard's turn and they have to sift through 23 to 45 spells, that turn's going to take some time as they have to look shit up. If people don't have to look stuff up, your game's going to go faster. So, it's my 2 cents about that. And I don't want it to sound like I'm just going to spend this whole time dumping on D&D, because I'm not. D&D is wonderfully accessible. I think the new edition, the 5th edition, is probably my favorite edition of D&D I've ever seen. But I can be critical of it. I've played it enough, and I do enjoy it enough. You can be critical of things you enjoy. And I do think that, especially in the tabletop gaming industry, we do seem to have lost some of that in the hobby. People get really, really attached to these games. I do remember the height of the edition war between 4th and 3rd edition, especially when Pathfinder came out, and I'm still kind of convinced that the people from Pathfinder were kind of fomenting that for sales. It was rough. Like, I would go to a game store to pick up a Savage Worlds book and have people lecture me on why I should be playing their edition of D&D. And I don't understand that mentality. I mean, I just kind of figure if you like it, you can like it. You can be critical of it, but you can still like it. And even if somebody likes something else, that's kind of fine. I mean, it's none of my business what you're playing at your table. And if you wind up making your game where everybody is a half dragon, half pixie, were-Tarask sexomancer, I mean, if that's how you like to play, that's how you like to play. Go have fun. All right. So moving back to painting, we are just about done with the Nuln Oil wash. And we got a lot of pooling on this guy on that, I guess you'd call it a kilt. As Lady Witchfox said. What was the hashtag? I'm going to scroll back up and see this. Hashtag not my kilt. Well, hashtag this is my kilt. I just got to decide if I'm going to do a tartan pattern on it. I don't think I will. Not for the tabletop guys. If the Orc King winds up having a kilt, I will do a full tartan pattern on him. Dropping stuff. All right. So we have the wash is done on that rug. And then we're going to do the washes on this rug. All right. Generally speaking, washes you do want to apply pretty liberally because you want to make sure they completely cover, especially when we're talking about these guys where we're doing things mostly as a tabletop quality standard. I want to get this done relatively quick. Now, we are going to go ahead and apply. We're going to do a little bit differently with this chess piece. We're actually going to pull out the good brush. And I want to go ahead and darken this up a little bit, so we're going to do what's called a recess shade. Now, I haven't done this yet before because we're doing tabletop quality, but I'm going to go and I'm going to do a heavy recess shade on this. But I'm just going to run it along the crevice and just get this wash right in the areas of the recess. So it's a more controlled application of the shade. Now, with the amount that I'm applying, there's likely going to be some running down, and that's perfectly fine. I get the idea these guys aren't going to be taking super good care of their armor, especially considering it's just plates that are nailed into their skin. But that's giving just a little bit more depth to that shade. Now, this is really good if you're doing like colored armor panels, like Space Marines. If you do Space Marines, then I'll probably go ahead and do a couple Space Marines on this channel just to show people how it's done, because they are very popular. This will be your bread. This will be one of your 2 bread and butter techniques. All right. Well, we have this set of washes on these guys, and I'm a little bit ahead of schedule compared to last time. I didn't do one color, and I didn't do one of the washes because I am going to have to wait for these things to dry. My portable fan does not have batteries in it, and I am out of drink. So I am going to take a quick 5-minute break. I will be back shortly with more batteries in the fan. I'm going to let these guys dry a little bit, and then we will be back. So stay tuned, sports fans, and we will be back momentarily. All right, we are back. Let's adjust my camera back to where it should be. Got a little bit of a jury rig setup here because I'm still not exactly where I want to be with it. All right, so we are going to get back to it. I got the batteries in my little minifan properly in there. So it is drying off the wash. I'm doing a fantastic job of it. I'm still amazed that a little bit of airflow will cause all the difference on that. So in the meantime, I am going to go ahead and do a tiny bit of work on this zombie beholder. Let's go ahead and start out. A little bit of this polished bone. We're going to need the polished bone for a bunch of stuff anyway, so this is basically the wet palette. It's not even functioning like a wet palette right now. It's just functioning like a regular palette. So the whole point of wet palette is that there's a semi-permeable membrane that will allow a small amount of water to pass through and keep your paints moist, but this is separated from the sponge, so it's not really doing that anymore. I'm going to go ahead and apply this polished bone over to this beholder's eyes, all of them that are currently open and not shooting out laser beams. Because this is actually a commission that I've been backed up on. My client has basically said that he doesn't need it for a while, and now he is telling me he needs it, so I want to get it done. So we'll go ahead and apply this to all the eyes. So I know this is kind of a jump away from the orcs, but I do always recommend having a small side project if you're doing a group of things like 5 or 6 at a time like I typically do. This lets you do something during that dry time, so you're not just sitting there waiting for stuff to go. Because dead time is where you will lose time on miniature painting, and I am all about that efficient workflow. There we go. So I took a couple minutes out to go ahead and give a hug and kiss to my lady love, get a new drink. In this case, it's just regular old water, because I think I have had enough to drink tonight. Also grab a small snack, just grab a couple small pieces of cheese, because I do love me my fine cheeses. And then get back to this. Let's paint this big ol' central eye. Then we're going to paint just the teeths. Like I always tell my dogs, show me them teeths. Teeths! Right. Right. So now that'll take some time to dry. I think during that time, I can head back on over here. Take a look. I mean, there's still a little bit of wetness in some of the crevices, but even a small amount of time on that fan makes a huge difference. So let's go ahead and start doing these bony, rocky outcroppings on these beautiful O-Rocks. Alternately, if you were painting these guys a little bit differently, you could paint these bony outcroppings as being like a crystalline thing, and that would be also really cool. Now let's take a look at his face. Do you have any bony outcroppings on your face? You do. You have bony outcroppings in your face. They are called teeth. We all have bony outcroppings in our face, unless you don't have teeth, in which case you don't have them. In which case I'm sorry for you, and you don't know how to chew your food because you don't have teeth. All right. And this will be the detail that really starts making these miniatures shine. really makes them stand out from the other ones too. That's one of the details on these guys that I thought was really, really interesting, because Orogs normally they're like I think they're like an Orc Ogre hybrid in D&D. And I thought the idea of having them be actually like in here, and like Steamforged is presenting them more as like dire orcs. And I appreciate that. I think that's a cool idea, because that's the weird thing about dire animals in D&D is they have a habit of having like spikes and horns and all that kind of crap on them. Which I always thought that was a little bit weird. I always thought you could just have like, it's a dire wolf, it's just a big friggin' wolf. No, apparently in D&D they've actually got like horns and spikes. Okay, make sure we are covered on the bone spikes. And now we got some growing out of his back in like a cluster here. Kind of wish that they did 3 Orogs in this set instead of 2, but I think I understand why they only did the 2. It seems like most like the fancy specialist stuff, like the gladiators, the cooks, the brewmasters, the Orogs. It seems like they decided they only wanted to do 2 of them to kind of like probably try to make them still feel special. But I don't know. I also think that's probably one of the coolest figures in this set. All right, so we're also going to do the trim and the furry trim on his kilt. And we'll move on to the next Orog. So it looks like I got right about an hour left in the session. For those just tuning in, we are doing not necessarily a speed paint, because I don't like the term for that. We're doing a tabletop quality workflow paint job. So the goal on this is just to go ahead and make them look good at tabletop, do a little bit more than just flat color. Like, we still want them to look okay. But our goal is to go ahead and show workflow, so we can go ahead and get this batch of 5 done during this 3-hour broadcast. We were able to do it last week, and I think we'll be able to do it this week without too much trouble. We got an hour left, a little bit less than an hour left, and we are probably just about past the 2/3 mark. Especially once I get to the point where I'm doing relatively minor highlighting on these guys, so I'm not doing a really tremendous detail job like I do on my Tyranids. So we have been in the chat talking tabletop role-playing games, and I have been at this point doing DMing since pretty close to when I started on this hobby, which means I've been doing this for about 25 years. I am more than happy to give any sort of DMing advice that people may have. I'll go and probably start talking about it. I know last week we talked a lot about the different props and kind of like tools of the trade of tabletop role-playing games, with your miniatures and your battle mats and your props and that kind of stuff. I think for the rest of the night, I'm probably going to just talk about different ways to help speed up your game, because I know a lot of people, I see a lot of people interested in that particular topic online. And at risk of sounding like I'm dumping on D&D, I think that probably the best way to speed up your game is to play something other than D&D. D&D just by its nature has a lot of rules to it, and especially if you have a lot of spellcasters in your group, there's just going to be a whole lot of bookkeeping and rules referencing that you're going to have to do. Every spell is its own beautiful and unique snowflake. They all work individually of each other, and that is, as far as like a workflow efficiency thing, is a goddamn nightmare. What I would recommend if you have spellcasters in your group, and I don't care if they are clerics who have access to everything, have your players use spell cards or print out every single spell that they can cast. Have a printout. Spell cards from Gale Force 9 work really well. Have that reference available to you. The biggest goal you have is to make it so nobody has to open a book. Part of this is going to be system mastery and making sure everybody knows the rules. And this is something that I'm a little bit tossed on. I understand that every group, you are probably going to have a couple people that just don't have the level of buy-in to completely learn the rules. There is a tendency amongst role players that they don't, I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying that there's enough of them for it to be a tendency, that they don't want to read the rule book. They just want somebody to teach them how to play. And that is one of the ways that people learn, is by having somebody else teach them. It will benefit your table greatly if everybody reads the rulebook. As much as I know a lot of your players and friends don't want to. Make sure everybody does have a copy of the core rulebook, the player's handbook, if you're playing D&D. Other games that aren't as rules intensive, this isn't necessarily as important. But if you're playing D&D, everybody at that table should have a copy of the player's handbook. Don't share books. Besides that, a lot of it is kind of pacing. Try to keep everybody involved. If everybody is paying attention to a combat encounter, it will naturally go faster. People will be figuring out what they want to do on other people's turns. Ideally, and I'm not saying this is always going to be the case because the game state changes with every turn, but from an ideal standpoint, when somebody's turn comes up in combat, they should already know what they want to do. And the best way to make sure that happens is to build your encounters as engaging as possible. Make them interesting. Make it so that what happens on other people's turns really matters. All right, just for the record, we are going to go and paint the fletching on these arrows. And it looks like I missed a little bit of some area here. I don't know what that, I don't know if that's supposed to be hair or fur or what. But we're going to paint that with the off-white. This is Reaper Polished Bone, which is one of my favorite off-whites. Once again, remember, the secret to painting white is the same secret to painting black. You never actually paint white, only on the very highest of the highlights. And even then, most figures shouldn't have that. So yeah, so speeding up your game, largely it's a factor of prep, it's a factor of buy-in, and it's a factor of people wanting it to happen. If you talk to your player characters, if you talk to your players, and everybody buys into this idea of like no bookkeeping and never referencing a book, you'll be shocked at how much faster your game will run. And there have been observers, like I don't know how scientific the studies have been, but there have been people who have shown that the game grinds to a halt the moment somebody opens a book. And on top of that, when somebody opens a book, the only people who care are the GM and the person opening the book. If the GM's the only one opening the book, guess what? Your players don't care. And that is a great way to go ahead and just break the immersion of the game and get people to stop paying attention. I did not get the trim on these furry Ugg boots. So we should do that. Even if it's not there, I'm going to paint it on there. It's crazy. Once you actually get that white, how much more finished these guys look. So yeah, engaging combat encounters that everybody has to contribute to will help people not want to reference as much, and they'll pay attention. I know some people are really big about like egg timers and sand timers. I'm not as big of a deal on this because as far as I'm concerned, if it gets to that point, you know, you've kind of already lost. If your if your players really are waffling on what to do, then yeah, you may want to go and pull that out and start talking to them. But for the most part, that really shouldn't be too much of an issue. All right, well, we got that done now. So we can go and start some highlighting. Let's crack my knuckles and my shoulders. Today, for the highlighting, I'm actually going to start out with a dry brush. Let's go ahead and get our, drop something. We're going to get our Vampiric Mist. Vampiric Mist. Feel what I guess is like some sort of a speaker popping or something like that. Or it's the batteries popping. That's weird. That's not good. This fan might just be bad. It's popping batteries. That's not good. All right, well, we're going to take the Vampiric Mist. We're going to take a crappy brush. Crappiest brush we have. We're going to dry brush the bases. So dry brush, went over it last week, but I'm going to go over it again. Get some get some paint on your brush. Wipe almost all of it off. And then we're just going to do quick strokes in one direction. Apply very lightly. This is a technique you want to build up gradually usually, and less is more. In this case, because I'm running it as like an icy thing, I want there to be streaks. So I'm going to apply a little bit heavier and harder than I normally would for dry brushing. If you're good at it, you can make really nice smooth blends with dry brushing. Also think, because I've gotten a lot of questions about it, I may do a tutorial one week where I set the camera up on one of my kitchen countertops. It's a lot bit more stable, and I'm going to roll out a bunch of bases. That's right. So you got these fancy like icy bases. These things are done from rolling pins by a company called Green Stuff World. And I would recommend every miniature painter get a couple of them. This one is called Frozen, but I get a lot of use out of the bricks and cobblestone ones, as well as some of the more specialized ones. Like I picked up one of the packs I have has a Celtic and Runic one, and those are really cool, as well as I got some one on Celtic and Runic, as well as one that's from they say Atlantis, but it's really got just a really like octopus nautical theme to it with like a temple base, and it's really cool. I love that one, and I want to use it more. I love all things nautical and aquatic, and I absolutely adore the idea of having as many sea monsters as possible in my game. All right. Good water. Really happy I got a new refrigerator recently, so this is the first time that like I've had a refrigerator pretty much just to me and my fiance, and we're super happy about it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move in with a wash again, just so we can go and get that dry as quickly as possible. We have the Seraphim Sepia. Seraphim Sepia is probably my favorite wash. It's a lot like Agrax Earthshade, but it's lighter and more yellowed, and it works really, really well for bone. So that is what we are going to apply. We are going to go ahead and make sure that, because we're using my nice Kolinsky Sable brush, make sure it's actually cleared. We're going to apply it to the polar bear fur trim. We're going to apply it to all those bony growths on the O-Rog as well. Which, by the way, those of you who have not followed me, please do. I missed a spot on him. This is one of the really big pains in the butt and why you do want to be as thorough as you can when you do this stuff. I missed a spot of the polished bone on this guy's quiver, which means we're going to have to apply it and then come back, which is a huge pain. But yeah, so those of you who are hopping in, or if you're viewing this on video on demand, please, please, please follow me. I mean, even if you never actually tune into my broadcasts again, number of followers helps with the Twitch algorithm and helps me get a little bit further up on the totem pole. I know server space is limited, and the higher up on the totem pole you are, the better of a server you get devoted to. Plus, helps me on their algorithm, and people will see me more. So it really does help. I would appreciate it. And, you'll get notifications when I'm getting ready to actually stream. Plus, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Party Bear Studios on Facebook, Party Bear Studios on Instagram. In the event that you are looking for a commission painting for a reasonable price, I do those as well. I specialize in doing D&D characters and monsters. Because D&D is a game about stomping monsters and taking their stuff. And I love painting me some monsters. The thing I like about Seraphim Sepia as opposed to like Agrax Earthshade is that it does tend to be a much more subtle shade. But it's close enough that if I miss a spot, I can go back over it real quick. Like if I miss a spot with the Agrax Earthshade, I can go over it with the Seraphim Sepia. So if you guys wind up getting a lead on female monstrous miniatures like orcs, ogres, kobolds, that kind of stuff, please, 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 please let me know. I mean, I like Reaper because they do tend to have more of those, but I want more in my life. I would love it if I could eventually get a miniatures collection that is a 50-50 mix of male-female. I don't know what this is, but I'm going to paint it like the polar bear fur. I got like this weird like neck scruff thing happening. I don't know if that's supposed to be a cape or what, but oh well, we'll figure it out. All right, let's go ahead and paint that. Well, hopefully, spitting out some hot takes while I'm painting. I don't know exactly how hot of the takes they were. I think it's just me stating my opinion. Hopefully it'll get people to kind of expand their horizons a little bit. I mean, I think people should always try new things. Worst case scenario, you find it, you don't like it. I know I have absolutely had criticisms of Savage Worlds in the past. I think the new edition is fantastic, but I think that it still is lacking on the concept of like a big D&D style boss monster. I do think bad guys should have more ways to use bennies. I've heard a criticism that people say that just characters wind up feeling very samey after a while, and I really don't understand that. Mostly because every character I've ever seen played in Savage Worlds is very different from the others. But I've heard that often enough that apparently it's a thing. Big thing I like about Savage Worlds is that it empowers people to be creative. And that is really what these role-playing games are all about. Come on, let's get all these big spiky growths. And then I'll let that dry, and I think I'm actually going to move to metal first today. Do things a little bit differently. I missed a little bit of white here, but I'm still going to apply this. Once again, we're just doing tabletop, so I can probably just do the dry brush on that, and it'll be fine. All right. So that'll be him. One more left for the Seraphim Sepia. So especially when I'm painting yellow, I tend to go through a lot of Seraphim Sepia. Okay, let's go and apply some of this to here to just darken that down a little bit. Now I am going to be, technically speaking, I am not applying this as a wash. This is technically being used as a glaze. The difference between them, if you ever hear people talking about washes versus glazes, washes go in the crevices. Glazes are there to change the color of the paint itself. It's watercolor techniques. Right, so we got that done. We're going to go to the metal next. I did pick up, we have the shadowed steel, which is all well and good. We did that for the base coat, but I do have here some Reaper blade steel, and this is going to be a good highlight. So we're going to start out on these Orogs. They're going to be, the blade steel is going to be significantly lighter than the shadowed steel. So we're going to want to take the crappiest brush we can find. We want this to be frayed, because this is largely going to be a variant on dry brushing. But we're going to go ahead and very, very lightly, it is going to be dry brushing, but we're going to lightly, very specifically head up these crates, up these plates, to just catch the edges. And it's going to just get the edges, and it's going to brighten it up, make it look nice and shiny, like it's almost a beaten, kind of oiled iron. That's what we're aiming for. And then we'll do a really quick dry brush, very, very light on his, I guess that's a flail, ball and chain. I believe that is the single most impractical weapon that's possible. I know they were not actually used. It's purely a Hollywood thing. I don't believe that there are any historical examples of a flail being used in combat. Could be wrong. I'm not an expert, but that is my understanding. Now, this is an example of how sometimes when you're dry brushing, the direction of the brush can make a big difference. Right, I don't think we're going to have to do too much with this on these guys. All right, so let's go ahead. I think today we're going to mostly finish with the skin. So we're going to go and move to that brown that we did for their pants. I'm going to bring up to rich leather. And just like on the previous orcs, this is going to be a really subtle highlight. Nice thing is about highlighting, you don't really need a ton of paint. Not as much as you do for like base coating. We're just going to go ahead and trace the ridges on this brown fabric. Just give it a little bit more depth. That's all we need. Considering we're doing a tabletop quality standard, we're not going to do much more layering on top of this. But you're going to go ahead and paint some happy little orcs. Just a little bit on that one, and then move to the next one. Okay. It's nice to know that my little battery-powered fan is a kind of a defunct now. I do have a bigger one that's a really big, nice. It's a powered by my normal power drill battery. I might bring that out, but it's a much bigger fan. Normally my fiance uses it when she does her outdoor art markets. She's selling her delightful miniature art, because we're both artists. We both enjoy the painting, which was fantastic when we met, because we could actually talk about stuff together. Even if she's really more of an artist than I am. But she tells me I'm one, so I'm willing to believe her. She's usually right about stuff. Because she's so smart. All right, let's go over that white that we got on there. Okay. All right, so that is it for that highlight. All right, what are we going to do next? We got that. Let's go ahead and highlight our wood. I got two different colors for this. I think I'm going to go with a blonde shadow. I think I did the olive skin highlight last time, but I did olive skin this one. And there's not like the big barrel like there was on the Brewmaster, so this is still going to be a really, really quick, simple, easy highlight. And once again, this is when you really start adding that depth and interesting stuff to the miniatures. And if it looks a little bit more extreme than you'd think, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's one of the kind of guiding rules when you do highlights is you usually want to go a little bit higher than you initially think you need to until you develop a really good eye for it. I still mess this up. So don't think like this is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I love that they're using these horribly impractical, super crooked bows. Let's go ahead and paint in there too. We're just adding a little bit of definition in here. You don't have to be super, super thorough about it. You can already see that previous brown as it dries. A lot of it just kind of fades into the background, which is great. Keep it as a really subtle highlight. I remember a while, these little miniature holders from Games Workshop were really hard to get a hold of because they were a lot more popular, the handles. They were a lot more popular than they expected. Which I love mine. I mean, I got 5 of them. That's the big reason why I normally limit myself to only painting 5 miniatures at a time, is because I only have 5 handles. I should probably buy more eventually, but they're relatively inexpensive and they're easy to get a hold of now. I know there's a couple other brands that make some that are made of MDF, and you can always just strap them to like a soda bottle lid, or I've seen people use wine corks. So these guys are starting to come together. I mean, I got about half an hour left in the stream. Should be just finishing these guys up. Which means maintaining my pace of 5 orcs in 3 hours. Which 3 hours is 180 minutes. Which I believe that winds up reaching 24 minutes per orc, which is not bad. It's a pretty speedy thing. I do think next week I'm going to do the polar bear guys, and so I'll only have 4. But they are much, much larger figures. They're on big old honkin' 50 millimeter bases instead of these little 30 ones. I think a little bit bigger than 50, actually. Oh, but they're big boys. They're awesome looking. All right, we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of flair. I've got a contrast Magos purple, or however the hell you want to pronounce that. We're going to go ahead and apply these just to the arrow fletching real quick. This is once again a contrast paint, and this is going to just add a little bit of spice to the arrows to break up the colors a little bit and give it a little bit more flair. Okay, there's that. So, but yeah, follow my Facebook and Instagram. I do post a lot more stuff. I paint a lot more than just what I'm doing on the stream. This is kind of just a little bit of a project that I want to do to get these orcs done. I just earlier painted a finished painting a Blood Bowl team that I got posted up. So my Old World Alliance of the New Empire Expatriates will be joining my league. It is eventually my goal to have one Blood Bowl team for every league for every team in the NFL. I don't know if I'll do it. Well on my way. I've got 7 teams painted now. It's taken me a while, but I've got, I think, 4 or 5 more to paint from my Christmas haul. I got a lot of Blood Bowl stuff for Christmas. It was pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get the Seraphim Sepia on this area that I missed last time. All right. So we got that. Let's go ahead and move on to this blue. I'm going to moving from the Glacier Blue up to Frost Blue like I did last week. And this is an example of where less is more. Dabble do ya. I mean, the Griff Charger Gray does already a really good job of shading. So we want to keep these highlights really subtle and just do a couple lines. Now, these guys have like a little zigzag symbol on their shoulder pads. And for that, I'm actually going to paint it in gold. I love gold! So I'm basically just going to line that with this much, much lighter blue. So we'll be taking care of the orcs on polar bears next time. I got them all properly primed because we got a cold front that came through and it sapped up the humidity that we've been getting. That is kind of an ongoing problem down here, and that's one of the things that irritates me about living in Florida is that there's only a certain time of year where primer behaves like it should. And considering that I actually have a room in the house that is a full art studio between me and my lady love, it would make sense for me to get an indoor priming booth. I just haven't gotten around to it. We're just finishing getting it set up to actually be our hangout room. I've got a little bit too much on there. So I hope anybody watching this on a video on demand or anybody who's just tuning in, I do hope that you're taking something from it, whether it's me rambling about role-playing games or if it is getting a little bit of painting technique from me. At the very least, maybe taking a look at the process and hopefully demystifying it so it's not as intimidating. I know a lot of people get real intimidated by these things when they first see them, just because they're so damn small. And you don't have any of that, so Aerogs don't have any of that blue. All right, so I think actually it might be time for skin. You know what? We're not going to do skin yet. We're going to go and do that hair. So we got the Basilicum Gray. This one, because it's got that chalky stuff on the bottom. I do have a little agitator in here. We're going to have to shake it like a Polaroid picture. I said now shake it. Shake it. Ow, ow. All right, just checked into the viewers list. Hello, Lemon Juices 12 and Rubber Slayer. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to chat. I'm basically just rambling on about role-playing games. I've had some video on demand if you want to see the full discussion, and doing some painting techniques. We are painting some of the guys from Hall of the Orc King by Steamforged Games in their Epic Encounters line, which are absolutely delightful. We're going to apply this Basilicanum Gray to the orc's hair. Hopefully, we'll be able to have that completely dry by the time we move on to the skin. Fortunately, the Orogs do not have any hair. All right, so I would be remiss at this point if I did not recommend the Facebook group. If you have any interest in painting miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games, you should join Dungeons & Dragons Miniatures Painting on Facebook. We have about 6.5 thousand members now. I'm the admin for the group. We have our mod squad. And it's a constant schedule and discussion about everything from experienced painters to new painters to showing off models to finding resources for models. Anything you may want to know about the hobby, we are discussing. It's a great group. We've worked really hard to maintain a very friendly atmosphere, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it. And I recommend everybody join up if you have any interest. All right, we are back to Snow Shadow because the Griff Charger Gray... Oh, I missed some spots. Okay, we're going to go back to the Orogs, and we got these kind of like van braces they have in the ice blue. We're just going to go ahead and do a little bit of highlighting on them. Not much. Just enough to get the point across, because this is tabletop quality. All right. Now we're back to Snow Shadow. Snow Shadow. All right, this is where we want it to be a little bit thinner. So we're going to go ahead and get a little bit of water on our brush, and we're going to mix it in with there to go and just thin down this paint a little bit to give us a little more control. Looks about right. And we are going to go ahead and just kind of brighten up the skin on these orcs. I'm going to start with the Orogs because we didn't have any hair on them, and they got these great big meaty fists. And we're going to go ahead and highlight the face, leaving just the recesses with that Griff Charger Gray. Now, one of the things I do recommend you do, and I said it last week, I'll say it again, if you don't know how to paint faces, realistically what you're doing is framing the face with paint, which means there is another art form that uses the same technique, and it's makeup. If you ever need a good idea of how to paint a face and where to put highlights, look up a YouTube tutorial on contouring. If you can contour a face, you can paint a face on a miniature. That's basically what we are doing. We got some big old muscles to paint here. This guy's got a scar. We'll go and highlight that up. I love seeing like a lot of the little details that pop up on these guys once you really start getting deep into the weeds painting them. So for my loyal viewers, once we finish up Hall of the Orc King, it'll be about 3 weeks, so halfway through November, we're going to need something else to paint. We're going to need something else to paint on the stream, and I would love some recommendations. I do have another one of the Epic Encounter sets. We've got Hall of the Kobold Queen. I may do Lair of the Frost Giant, which is a companion set to the Orcs. It's just a big old, very beautiful Frost Giant. I'll probably be painting it in a very similar way. We can do that if you'd like to see a larger figure being... popped off. If you'd like to see a larger figure being painted, I could do that. Or I could jump to something else. I can paint some Blood Bowl. I can paint some Warhammer. I think I might go ahead and do a poll and see what you guys would like to see. Of course, if anybody actually subscribes, I think I'm just going to let them choose. And I'll find a way to actually acquire miniatures, provided it's not something really big like one of the Games Workshop Mega Gargants. I was very upset about the pricing on those. It's like I absolutely loved them and I wanted them, but I was not willing to pay $200 per miniature. Especially not when there are other companies that have things of comparable quality for a quarter of the price. And normally I don't dump on Games Workshop for their pricing because their stuff is top in the industry, but just those giants, I could not justify it. They were clearly setting up their price threshold. Especially if I do an army of them, I don't want to be spending $700-800 on an army that I'll get to play once or twice. All right. I can feel myself losing steam. I've been at this for almost 3 hours now. Oh, we're so close. I might go over a little bit. No, I don't think I will. I think I'm going to be right at the buzzer getting these guys done. Now, the nice thing about painting, like especially rough muscle like this, is you can be real, I'm not going to say sloppy with your highlights, but you can go and keep them looking pretty rough. You don't have to be particularly neat, and they're going to wind up looking real good anyway. All right, so you go over these fingers, ear for the face, nose, brow, forehead, lips, chin, jaw. Tag these fingers. I'm probably not going to do any more highlighting on the skin on the orcs. The Orogs, I think, need it, though. Well, we're getting real close to done here. All right. So I think we do need a little bit more time to let that Seraphim Sepia dry, so we are going to wrap up with the dry brushing on that and the highlighting on the bone. But in the meantime, this gold is cast. All right. So we're going to go and put cursed gold along this like arm guard thing that they have. I'm trying to put a little bit of cursed gold on all the miniatures just to help break up all these cool colors. A little bit of warmth. Let's go and get this. Zigzag pattern on that pauldron. And keep in mind, guys, you can make these guys as detailed as you want. There's a lot of little stuff in here that I'm not necessarily focusing on. Don't feel bad if you don't feel like doing them. I mean, this is, once again, we're doing this to a tabletop standard. I just want to show that you can do this, that you can have this at a tabletop standard in just a few hours. Other streams I'm going to be focusing on a different level of quality. But I would like these guys to kind of match. All right, there's that. Let's take a look at the O-Rogs. Do you have any gold? Yeah, you do. Just a little bit. We're going to go and line this Van Brace he has. Just a little bit to help break up the colors. So it's not just blue on more blue. Okay. Let's get O-Rog number 2. I'm curious about the adventure that comes with the epic encounters. As much as I've been talking up the miniatures, I haven't actually read the book that comes with them. It comes with a little encounter book with a full adventure using the miniatures, 2 small, like really, really cool looking pre-made maps that you can use. All right. So we are now, I think, 2 steps away from being done probably. Let's go ahead and get a little bit of water in this paint that's kind of dry. We're just going to go ahead and do a quick zap up on these bony spikes. Okay, that's a thing where a little bit will do great. Want to make sure you're not completely covering all that shading you did. Just make sure you touch every single one of these bone spikes, as well as his great big tusks. All right. So then I believe we're going to be pretty close to done with our nice brush. Let's go and get not necessarily a terrible brush, but one that we're not going to mind junking up a little bit because it's time to dry brush. It's a controlled dry brush, but we're going to go back to the polished bone. And we're going to go and just go over the trim real quick for the polar bear fur. Just a little bit to brighten it up so it looks less brown and more white. If you missed an area, you can go over it now, and it'll go ahead and bring it up to the white. Just takes a little bit. If you get a little bit elsewhere, don't worry about it. Just say it's snow. You will get on the area that I missed there to just go ahead and make it look like a little bit of fur. And you will get on that same spot. All right, we are so close to done, guys. So close to done. I think I'm going to go a couple minutes over, but I am okay with that. Let's go ahead and jump back to the Agrax Earthshade real quick. Now that the gold should be dried enough, and we are just going to go ahead and go over most of this gold. We're going to go over there on his little vambrace thing and on the zigzag. I'm not going to bother on the O-Rugs because I think that I don't want to get it on the blue, and I think if we do too much, it's going to do that. Okay. We are almost there, guys. All right. Next step, we have Citadel Wildwood. This is a very dark brown contrast. I noticed that there are a couple spots where it looks like there are like some arm straps and whatnot on these O-Rugs. So we're going to go ahead and just do a Wildwood contrast over them so it doesn't just look like they're part of the skin. And that little bit will make a big difference in the overall look of the figure. Especially when it's over this nice light skin, you actually get a little bit of that contrast effect happening. Because this type of contrast can hide all manner of sins and mistakes. All right. All right. With that, we have one final step. I used Dragon Black last time. I'm using Pure Black this time. It is time to do my final step that I use as my indicator that I am done with the miniature. I am going to rim the bases. Let's take a brush I haven't touched yet. Take you off the holder. And we will. This is one we're going to slap this paint on pretty heavy because we want it to be a nice thick coat, and if it's a little bit streaky, nobody cares because it's just black around the rim. Now, a lot of times people will recommend that you don't rim your bases pure black, that you do it like a brown or a gray or something that matches the rest of them. I rim all my bases black. And I do that just so I have like a nice uniformity amongst them. I don't really place these things on like a terrain tabletop usually. If they're on top of anything, it's a battle mat. But most of the time, they're just sitting in my display case. So I'm really more concerned with how they look by themselves, not how they're sticking out on a big terrain table. If I'm doing Warhammer, that's another story. Those guys get rimmed usually in a brown or something that's equivalent to their basing. But these guys are just going to be black. Okay. All right. That is that. All right, guys. I'm going to close my wet palette and put these guys on top. We have one O-Rog, two O-Rog. We'll put them down here. One O-Rog, two O-Rog, one Archer, two Archer, three Archer, and then from last week, one Gladiator, two Gladiator, one Spearman, two Spearmen, three Spearmen, and the test figure of the Brewmaster. So, over the course of 2 painting sessions and a grand total of 6 hours, we have finished now 10 different miniatures, with one on a 2-hour paint session to just get the test model. So we are at a total of 14 hours on this project. Oh, one thing I do want to do, I do have some Caribou Crimson because it's a detail that I noticed that I missed on the Orc Gladiators. They got these big open mouths that just kind of look like voids, so I'm going to go back and touch up. I haven't sealed them yet, so it's not a problem. But we're going to put just a tiny dot of Caribou Crimson in there to make it look like they got a big, open, bloody mouth with a tongue, instead of just being like a massive blue flash. All right. So there you go, guys. I mean, realistically, aside from the test figure, looking at 12 hours, we're looking at 6 hours worth of work. 8 hours if you want to consider the test figure in there. So we're at 8 hours for 11 dudes. Next week, we will be joining in on the polar bears. I have them primed and ready to go. If you have not seen them, please check out Steamforge's website. And thank you, Steamforged, for making such a wonderful product. Hall of the Orc King is only one of currently 6 boxes in the Epic Encounters line. They are paired up with a box of minions and a boss monster. In this case, it's a frost giant. But we have orcs riding polar bears. How friggin' cool is that? That's so darn cool. If you think this is cool, just wait until the goblins. Goblins are riding tree frogs. That's right, goblins riding great big tree frogs. I don't think you can get much cooler than that. All right, well, that is going to be it for the stream. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for keeping the chat up and running this week. Please go ahead and subscribe if you can. At the very least, follow me so you'll see when my next broadcast is, and I will see you next week.